our AVST Live webinar, Disruptive IT Trends 2016. We're going to be covering Skype for Business and the cloud. We actually have a panel of presenters today. Before I turn it over to them, just want to let you know a couple of things. We are recording this session, and so you're welcome to view the recording afterwards. We'll send out a link to that as soon as it's available online. And the slides are available for downloads. You can find them in the handouts area of the webinar panel. If you have that minimized, use the orange arrow in the upper right corner. And lastly, we will, of course, have time for Q&A at the end. And you're welcome to type your questions in at any time, and we'll have those queued up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hardy Myers, who is going to introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Hardy Myers, CEO of AVST. Joining me from AVST is Tom Menifee, our Chief Technology Officer, and we're very honored to have as our special guest Irwin Lazar, who's the Vice President and Service Director for Nemertes. Nemertes is a research advisory and strategic consulting firm that specializes in analyzing and quantifying the business value of emerging technologies. Just as a quick update on or introduction on AVST, our vision as a company is to be the leading developer of best-of-breed unified communication software for the enterprise. Our focus today is, meaning at this point in time, is specifically around mission-critical voice applications, including highly scalable call processing and messaging solutions, mobility applications, collaboration, and business process. With that, what I'd like to do, Ann, is go to the next slide. And we do a series of webinars, through the course of a year. And generally, the first one we do every year is to highlight, the big trends that we're seeing, the key trends. And of course, this one's been entitled Disruptive Forces. And clearly, what we believe collectively, AVST and of course Nemertes as well, is that Microsoft and the entire Skype for Business Office 365 developments, as well as just the cloud in general, are two of the more disruptive forces impacting the unified communication space. And we really see that and its impact on three specific areas of the business. Of course, the incumbent vendors like Cisco, Avaya, ShoreTel, Mitel, NEC, etc. It also is, of course, impacting the channel, how customers are consuming the technology, and their demands on the channel to become more like systems integrators as these different technologies come together. And of course, for customers, it's causing a lot of, I don't want to say confusion, but certainly it's an opportunity to take a pause, to step back. Are we going to consume our unified communications technology on-prem like we have historically? Are we going to move to the cloud? Is it going to be a hybrid? And these are all things we're going to talk about and highlight to you some of the really compelling research data that Nemertes, as well as some other analysts, we have gathered for this presentation. Next slide, please, Ann. So let's talk about the state of the UC market as we from research. Tom, did you want to take the first slide in this section, please?
Sure. Thanks, Hardy. If you look at the UC spend on a worldwide basis, Gartner projects it to grow to just over $40 billion in 2019. That's in comparison to, if you look at last year, 2015. Was right around $37 billion. So it's continuing to grow, but the interesting piece is what's actually growing. And the largest piece that's found in a growth perspective is really the cloud-based telephony and messaging component. So as everyone knows, unified communications is made up of a lot of different components. And people tend to consume them individually. What we're seeing and what Gartner's projecting is that from a telephony and messaging perspective, folks are now looking at the cloud as a delivery mechanism for those components. So expecting those to grow to $13 billion in 2019 of the $40 billion. If you look at the change in purchasing, it's really what we're finding is just on a pure product basis, if you look at the spend on premise-based telephony and messaging versus cloud-based telephony and messaging, they're going to cross over. So right now, premise-based telephony and messaging is certainly larger than cloud consumption but we see that crossing over in 2017. But this is a little deceptive in that with cloud offerings, typically it's an all-in-one type purchase, so that services, the product, the maintenance, it's all bundled into that monthly charge. It's, cloud consumption is typically per user per month type services. However, with premise, it's typically purchased on a different basis. So if you include the services associated with that, we still see premise-based telephony and messaging plus the associated services outstripping the cloud offering for quite some time. As you can see, cloud is definitely on a growth pattern. Premise is on a decline, but premise is still bigger. So the takeaway on this really is, both models are viable and vibrant, and customers are going to pick what makes the most sense to them. But all projections show that the trends are clear as more and more people are moving to the cloud. I think
Tom, I would add just as a comment that from the sales side that we've seen a significant increase in the number of discussions about consuming unified communications from the cloud, whether it's in a full the full UC stack or a hybrid scenario where some of the technology is consumed, remains on-prem, and some of it's consumed from the cloud.
Sure. Yeah, agreed. So I think Irwin's got some data on this as well.
Sure, and I would echo what Hardy, what you just said in terms of cloud not being really an all or nothing discussion, but what the conversations we're having with our enterprise clients and the data that we're gathering in our research is that organizations are looking at what specific components make sense to move to the cloud and when. And a lot of that is based on their existing legacy infrastructure, existing investments, the readiness of cloud solutions to support things like real-time voice, their ability to manage performance and security in the cloud, and so on. So in our latest benchmark, which we gathered data from roughly 50 end-user organizations, about 75% of those were over 2,500 employees, we saw across the board cloud-based UC and collaboration service adoption rising. The only kind of trailing factor there is around voice at the bottom, and that's because, again, the nature of the pool that we talk to tend to be mid to large size organizations that are heavily invested in voice, may have customized voice solutions, may not find that the cloud-based voice solutions are quite ready for their needs. But when you look at breaking that down by demographics, the SMB market is heavily investing in cloud telephony, upwards of 25% now.
Yep, and that's the trend that we've been seeing as well. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide, then this actually synchronizes very nicely with what you were just saying. What we saw really starting in 2004 was, small businesses, this is a market perspective, starting to adopt unified communications as a service. 2009, and we start to see more mid-size. The last couple of years, if you track some of the pure play cloud providers, you can see that they started very, very small sub 10 user type deployments, and they are now moving into the enterprise. When I say enterprise, they're moving up in size of enterprises, and the average number of users per cloud deployment is increasing. And it's really only the last, I would say, 24 months that I was referring to earlier that we've seen medium and large customers in a significant percentage starting to talk about consuming technology, consuming unified communications as a service from, as a real viable scenario. And we see that accelerating quite significantly the last 12 months. I would say, we went from perhaps 1 out of 10 conversations about cloud to perhaps 3 out of 10, maybe 4. And of course, everyone's thinking about it, but as Irwin referenced, there's very significant investments on the prem, long-term investments with long depreciation cycles, and so it isn't typically a big bang type scenario. It's going to be an evolutionary approach. The next slide just kind of highlights the 4 areas where how competitors or how solution providers are converging on the unified communications as a service or the cloud market. Everyone that has traditionally sold unified communications solutions is has actively deployed or is deploying cloud solutions. Of course, they're playing a little bit of catch-up in most cases to the pure play providers like the Ring Centrals, the 8x8s, BroadSoft, and who's obviously selling their technology through large service integrators. And then of course we have on the which we're going to talk about in just a minute, we have some new emerging players, and I say emerging is probably not the right term, but Microsoft has made a very concerted effort in the last 7 to 10 years to move into the unified communication space, and now they're rotating towards the cloud in addition to already having a fairly formidable market share in certain elements of the premise-based UC stack. Google, of course, has a very strong presence around the Google Apps and as well. Next slide, please. So, Irwin, did you want to? And I think this is great data that you have from your survey. Do you want to just highlight some of this, the interesting points in these two slides, please?
Sure, and also just to touch on the slide that you just presented, I think one of the really key points there is the diversity of types of cloud offerings. Some of the ones you showed were customized, hosted, private solutions built for organizations so that they can outsource that infrastructure and pay on a subscription basis, where others are leveraging more of a public cloud model. So what we're seeing is, again, as I mentioned earlier, this march to the cloud, and it's largely being led by email and calendar. That seems to be the low-hanging fruit for organizations that are looking at what their cloud strategy should be. And a lot of times that's because they got to an inflection point with Microsoft Exchange and they said, do we really want to invest in the next generation of Exchange on-prem when the Microsoft's direction is into the cloud, IBM's is into the cloud, Google is so on as a cloud-first solution. So as you look at the data point here from 2014, where 37% had no plans for cloud, down to 29 by 2015 into 2016, almost half of the organizations that we benchmarked will have deployed cloud-based email, calendar, IM by the end of this year.
Yeah, and that Office 365 percentage is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's become the de facto standard for, especially in the mid to large size. We certainly, if you look at the vertical breakdown, we see Google in higher ed, we see them in nonprofit, small companies, but among the mainstream enterprise organizations. And I should add that this data set is largely North American headquartered organizations, but more than 60% are global. You see just a massive uptake of Microsoft Office 365.
And Tom, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I was quite impressed, or I guess surprised by, was how fast that change occurred, Irwin. So, I don't know what your data on how big that percentage was of Office 365 2 years ago, but I mean that number has come up very significantly in the last 24 months.
Yeah, when we first started looking at this space, I would say in around 2012, 2013, we had far more conversations around Google than we did around Microsoft, and we saw more interest in Google, and Google really driving that initial foray for a lot of companies to go into cloud, email, calendar, messaging, and so on, but Microsoft has definitely caught up.
Yep. Great. Next slide, please. This one's yours also, Irwin.
Okay, great. So we do find that not everyone is going to cloud. So we asked in our interviews with IT leaders, if you're moving to cloud, what's really driving you there? And if you're not, what's keeping you away? So one of the interesting points we've seen over the last 2 years now is when we first talked to companies about cloud 2-3 years ago, it was very much a cost savings discussion. They thought they would save money, both in staffing and licensing, hardware, infrastructure costs. Now they're thinking more of cloud as a means of keeping up with the rapid change in technology and not being on these 3-4 year life cycle, upgrade cycles for legacy or for on-prem infrastructure. And a lot of that's driven by more of an agile mindset entering the enterprise, more focused on innovation and just the general pace of technology change. For those who were not using cloud, and we saw a couple of key verticals here, typically regulated industries, financial services, healthcare, and so on, that have lots of concerns about data storage in the cloud, security was top of mind. A lot of the conversations that I've had over the last year have been dominated by the public leaking or hacks of data, and numerous examples I could spend some time going into, where you've seen high-profile data breaches in many well-known organizations. Few, if any, of those actually happened in the cloud, but they've caused people to take a step back and say, I need to understand, can I protect my data? What do I do to mitigate a breach? Do I really need to keep that on-prem? So the security conversations have really dominated our discussions around those that are not yet ready to make that leap into cloud.
Right. That makes perfect sense, and that's what we're seeing as well. Which is, and it's a very bright line, generally speaking. You know, the companies that know that this is that have a great concern about that are very, you know, it is what it is, and it just you need to work around it and deal with it as you're proposing solutions to them, which brings a lot of interesting conversations as you've highlighted. So Tom, can you summarize from our perspective what we would refer to as cloud confusion at AVST, and then maybe you could just give a little insight on how we think about that, please?
Sure. Yeah, it's many technology discussions are confusing, as is cloud is no different, and part of that is because cloud comes in many varieties. Here we're talking more primarily about public cloud, but there's private cloud, there's hybrid cloud, there's public cloud, and they're all a little different. And some customers are attracted to one of the three. We have traditionally played in the private cloud solution, where we've got a nice solution that goes into our customers' data centers with disaster recovery data centers and whatnot, and it's a nice solution for that. We're also seeing, just as Irwin had pointed out, with some of the other UC components, you see clearly that people have moved to Office 365 and some of the other solutions. That has caused us to have hybrid type deployments where some of our gear is deployed at the customer premise, but it's integrated in for unified communication purposes into hosted offerings. And then you've got the full UC stack being hosted as a UCaaS solution. So that's part of the confusion. But we're also seeing, we had mentioned that cloud tends to be a pretty common discussion for us in the marketplace, and it's very common for us to get the question, so do you have a cloud offering? And that typically isn't a yes or no question. It is yes, but you have to have a much deeper discussion, because some people are very interested in, when they ask about cloud, it is a delivery type discussion of where is this, where is the technology going to be hosted? Who's going to manage the technology? Others are more interested on the consumption side, where it's, when they ask about cloud, it's more of, I'm interested in a per user per month, subscription type basis, in one that can grow and contract. So if you've got a workforce that changes over time, you really don't want to own the technology and then feel like you own way more than you need, or you're constantly having to grow the technology. One of the nice things about cloud delivery and cloud consumption is the elasticity component of it, where it can grow and contract over time very easily. So there is a lot of confusion around the topic of cloud, and at AVST we think we're in a pretty good position to help customers with that, because we've always taken a very flexible approach to our solution so that we can support private, hybrid, public cloud. With AVST next, 2 weeks from now, we're actually going to make some announcements around public cloud offering for us that we think our customers are looking for from us, and so we're excited to start talking about that in the market. So at Enterprise Connect in a couple weeks, we'll be making some announcements around public cloud.
Great, thank you, Tom. All right, so I think we've covered the cloud pretty extensively. We want to shift now to a conversation about Microsoft and Skype for Business. As we mentioned previously, and next slide please, Dan, the Office 365, the rotation of enterprise towards Office 365 has been quite significant in the past 24, 36 months, And it started with an email, the migration from Exchange to Office 365, and now, of course, with the most recent announcement of the Cloud PBX, they're really starting. Microsoft is starting to move the entire Skype for Business UC stack into the cloud. And we're seeing, and there was also a brand change, as everyone knows, from Link to Skype for Business about a year and a half ago. And that has, there's a lot of customers that have started to go down the premise-based Skype for Business path, and now there's the cloud-based Skype for Business path as well. And we're seeing a lot of conversations in that area about which is the right answer, how do we do it? And I think Microsoft's working very diligently to help customers activate their licenses and continue their migration towards a Skype for Business type environment. We'll show you some of the statistics here that point to, I think, highlight. In fact, if you want to jump to the next slide, Irwin's got some really good data here about where customers are heading from a consolidation mindset. Irwin, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, this has been one of the real big trends that we've seen in our research and in our conversations with enterprise IT leaders over the last couple of years, is they've kind of given up the idea of multi-vendor UC. For years we would sit at Enterprise Connect and see vendors get on stage and say, yes, we're going to plug in and we'll make everything interoperable, and where customers are demanding it, and we'll make it happen. The competitive market has been such that the vendors have offered some interoperability solutions, but other vendors have gone off and developed their own standards, codecs, et cetera. So what we've seen is that enterprise organizations have struggled with the cost of managing and trying to integrate a multi-vendor environment, and also the solutions themselves have now grown in scope. So it used to be instant messaging was separate from voice, was separate from web conferencing. All of those have kind of converged. So what we've seen is a marked uptick in organizations telling us that they are focusing on consolidating their UC environment into a single vendor or into a single vendor ecosystem. So
right.
Obviously, not one vendor can do everything. And of those that are moving that way, so if you look at by 2016, about 45% of organizations will have started down this road of picking a vendor. Those that have selected a vendor are by and large going with Microsoft. And what that is, the reason for that is the Microsoft argument of, you've already got the desktop applications, you've got SharePoint and Link, now Skype for Business. We can bring voice into that. You can eliminate the separate voice infrastructure and even use the existing licenses that you have today. So that argument has been resonating with a number of the organizations that we study.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we just highlight this. We talked about this earlier, but you are seeing a very, very significant shift in market share with Microsoft. Really, their market share more than tripling in 2015, and of course, Google's starting to respond to that. And again, in their vertical market segments of focus, higher ed being one of those as an example. The next slide just highlights, and this is important, and this is also relevant to what Irwin was talking about earlier. What we see when we talk to customers is, despite the fact that there is now a, let's call it, directional pointing towards a Microsoft-centric world for many large enterprises, it is going to be an evolutionary approach. That is, they need to do it over time, and that's typically because of the complexity of the enterprise, the number of branches, the geographic presence, et cetera. And so in this most recent survey, about 80% of the customers said they would migrate, they plan to migrate to Skype for Business over time. What's interesting is some of this data I believe was done before the cloud was layered on top of that, the Office 365 Cloud PBX scenario. So it would be interesting, next year to take a look and see how much of that is we're going to continue to do Skype for Business on premise, or we're actually going to do it in a cloud scenario versus a full 20% rip and replace. And we're going to highlight, and the next slide highlights exactly what we're going to talk about here, what Irwin mentioned about an ecosystem around one of the primary go-to UC vendors. And the good news about the Microsoft environment is there are many vendors that have worked with and are working with Microsoft to support the evolution of enterprise infrastructure, UC infrastructure. And it's a growing and very strong growing ecosystem of many of whom are also partners of ours. But the point being that, as I said, it's typically an evolution, and there's going to be a primary UC vendor and then several enabling vendors that are supporting the full solution stack of the full UC solution stack. So the next thing we'd like to do is just to highlight for you specifically around that matter a Skype for Business case study, which we've entitled The Customer's Journey. And Tom, would you like to take us through this one, please?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. So AVST's been a Microsoft Gold partner for many years and have been part of the Microsoft ecosystem surrounding Skype for Business and Link before it for several years as well. One of the customers that we've helped migrate to Skype for Business is a local government within London, Lambeth Council, which is a sizable council within London. And when we first started working with them, they were an Avaya Nortel CS1000 customer, and they were looking at replacing that with Skype for Business. Some of their specific requirements were they had a large remote workforce, and they needed to be able to provide productivity solutions for that workforce. They also had some unique call processing requirements that were very complex that they have built around their current environment, and they need to make sure that they were able to carry those forward into the Skype for Business environment. So as we looked at their their deployment schedule, if you will, it really started with deploying our CX-E solution behind the CS1000 and start supporting some of those mobile customers with our mobile technology. They also deployed Skype for Business and deployed that out to their user community for instant messaging and presence. And then the final step was to bring the AVST and Skype for Business together as Skype for Business replaced the CS1000 functionality. So as they were taking on this project, they had identified a few areas that they really needed the AVST solution to supplement Skype for Business. Main areas were, one was just the basic interoperability, so being able to support that CS1000 and Skype for Business and help migrate users from one over to the other. They definitely had some complex automated attendant functionality that they needed. Basic voicemail that wasn't stored in Exchange, the mobility piece that I mentioned, and then they kind of stumbled across contact center as well as an additional one. So I'll talk about these in a bit more detail on a few of them. So firstly, on the automated attendant side, they have these complex menuing requirements that were multi-location, multi-time zone type requirements that were very complex. And what they found is with Skype for Business itself, it could handle some of those, but many of them were not possible. And this actually delayed their Skype for Business deployment until they had identified that the AVST solution could deliver this for them. So we were able to handle all of those, both within a CS1000 environment as well as within a Skype for Business environment. It really opened up the door for them to say, okay, now we can migrate from a instant messaging presence usage within Skype for Business over to full voice capabilities on Skype for Business. And so that was a big get by using our product. On the voicemail side, many customers have chosen that they can't store voice messages in an email system, specifically within Exchange in this case. So they want the separation, and that typically is driven by compliance concerns, or someone within the organization is saying, look, for retention reasons, we do not want to store voicemail within the email environment. We need to keep them separate. The CX-E solution from AVST is the only alternative to Exchange within a Skype for Business environment. So the only pure play voicemail solution that's out there is our product. And so Lambeth was able to use our product to keep messages separated. And then the last one that I'll mention is on the contact center side. What we found, and this is true with this customer as well, is there's a huge gap between what you can get out of response groups, which is a really nice feature within Skype for Business, and then what you get from the full contact center solution, which is a, contact center solutions are a dominant player within the Microsoft ecosystem. You'll find a bunch of the partners that are delivering that functionality. But there's big gaps in both in functionality as well as in price. And what we found is there was a demand for a solution that integrates in with Skype for Business but can meet the needs of an informal call center, where informal call center really being defined as individuals within a group that take calls, but they also do other things. Their entire job is not just to answer call after call after call after call. Rather, they are answering calls. They're performing other functions. An IT help desk is a great example of this, where you've got IT folks that are remoting into people's desktops and installing software, uninstalling software, diagnosing an issue. They're walking around helping people with, use technology within the organization. And they're also taking phone calls. So we've got a solution called TeamQ, which is a really nice fit. It's part of our solution. It delivers call center productivity tools so that agents within a informal call center are able to see, who's calling, why are they calling, how many calls are in queue, what are the other people within my group, what are the other agents doing, are they available for calls, so that I can make an informed decision as an agent within this group to determine, can I walk down the hall and help somebody, should I stay here and take a call, hey, there's a call from somebody, I know why they're calling back in, let me take that specific call. So we've delivered this TeamQ functionality really to meet the demand for this gap between response groups and contact centers.
Which has also been, from my perspective, an area of great interest at the most recent Microsoft conferences we've attended. Customers are looking for this type of technology. So,
yeah.
All right. Thank you, Tom. So just to highlight, I thought maybe, Irwin, did you want to give some concluding comments about the cloud and the Skype for Business trends?
Sure. Yeah, I think we really hit on one of the key themes, which is, again, the cloud is not all or nothing, and as Tom mentioned, there are lots of reservations from organizations that are evaluating cloud as to what makes sense to go in the cloud and what needs to stay on-prem. And it's not just security, as I talked about earlier, but things like performance and compliance restrictions that may even tie the hands of the ability to take advantage of the cloud. Again, I think most organizations we talk to are either evaluating, looking at, or using some form of the Microsoft communication portfolio. So for those who are continuing to move in that direction, integration support for Microsoft solutions is critical as they move forward.
Great. Thank you. Tom, you want to make any concluding comments or takeaways before we open up for questions?
Yeah, it's really just to follow on to what Irwin said. It's not a one size fits all, and a single solution is the best for everybody. It really does come down to individual needs and where you're starting from and where you're trying to get. And it really is the strength, in my mind, it's the strength of an ecosystem that helps you get there. And working with flexible partners is a great way to go.
And my takeaway would be that in both the cloud and the Skype for Business trends, if you're looking at either of those, some of the challenges are the same, which is you need to be real clear on what you're going to, as Tom said, have to bring in perhaps an alternative or an enabling technology to support your initiative, whether it's Skype for Business or cloud. For cloud, I think we got to be very clear. Are we talking consumption? Are we talking delivery? Are we talking both? And just to second or maybe third, what Irwin mentioned, where we've seen surprises with customers is where IT gets out ahead of their compliance, their confidentiality, the corporate compliance or confidentiality concerns, and they start going down a path, and then they basically hit a wall because they can't move forward because they did not take that into consideration. And so the good news is, through an ecosystem and through best-of-breed partners for Microsoft and delivering technology in the cloud, companies like AVST can help customers sort of break through those barriers and move forward with whatever their next generation cloud or Skype for Business or any other UC solution set is going to be. So, Ann, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions at this point.
Okay.
Hopefully they're all for Irwin.
They might be. There are a few questions in the queue already. I'll just let everyone know if you have a question and you haven't submitted yet, you can find the question box by expanding your window. Use the orange arrow in the upper corner and you should find the question box there toward the bottom. Let's see, first question. Do you see cloud solutions as having a longer or shorter life cycle than on-premise solutions?
Irwin, do you want to respond to that?
Sure,
or?
I can jump on that. I think it's a much, in terms of life cycle, I'm assuming you're meaning how quickly things are upgraded, not how long before you decide you're going to move in a completely different direction. I think once you kind of get on a cloud solution, you're on a continual journey. It's not this inflection point like we've had with every 3 years. Okay, does it make sense to invest in the next generation of whatever? Most of the cloud services that we're seeing now, especially the ones that are public clouds, software as a service, UC as a service type offerings, you're getting updates daily, weekly, monthly, and so the life cycle is roughly endless.
Tom, any comments on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. It's a great question, by the way, and it's one of the things that really has to be considered because there's differences in control. Because premise-based solution, you as the customer is controlling the pace at which you upgrade the solutions, and certainly you control when you decide I'm going to move off of this platform and go to, the second platform type of thing. Versus the cloud, you don't have great control over that. The cloud provider is deciding the pace at which things are upgraded and changed within that service offering. And what we found, or what we believe we will find, is customers tend to stick on that platform as long as it's actively developed. As long as you're getting out of it what you need, you're inclined to stick with it because you're getting the benefits out of somebody else managing that system for you. So it's an interesting comparison between the two.
And I guess, Tom, do we have enough data yet to comment on whether API, upgrades will impact, very tightly integrated solutions where, people are writing to APIs and whatnot, or is it still too early for that, in your opinion? Meaning, that could create problems for customers that are used to having it all locked down.
Yeah, if you're talking about if a customer's developed some custom apps.
Sure, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, it is too early for us since we don't have a public offering to date, but I can tell you from a technology standpoint, a platform developer, we all strive to support APIs moving forward, so there's backwards compatibility and all that, and that's going to be true with cloud offerings or premise offerings.
Okay, great, man. Next question. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. So next question, what market segment, global enterprise SMB, is driving cloud growth the most?
Irwin, did you want to comment on that?
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, it's definitely SMB today as far as I guess, again, it depends on the kinds of services. So as you think about things like web conferencing across organizations of all kinds, things like email that we talked about earlier, instant messaging, the Office 365, we are seeing adoption of that across any and all organizations. When you get into some of the things like video and voice that are heavily dependent on having a strong underlying network, those tend to be a little bit more focused on the SMB right now, and I think that over time will change again due to the big constraint that we've seen is if you're a global multinational with offices around the world, finding a cloud voice video solution that can reach all of your offices, that can do so in a manner that guarantees performance, that can enable you to have, say, a single dialing plan across the world, and local toll access and so on has been somewhat problematic.
Right. And as we all know, a small company of 10 users or less, you can do an over-the-top full UC stack and not have too many issues, and that's, you've seen that adoption in that area, and the growth has been spectacular. If you look at some of the pure play UC as a service providers, the last 2 years, you just see very significant adoption. So I agree with what Irwin just said on that. Next question, Ann, please.
Okay, yes. So if this wasn't addressed, how does mobile factor into cloud UC offerings? I assume they made for mobile employees.
Irwin, would you like to take a crack at that one?
Sure, yeah. And we often see mobile driving interest in cloud because the cloud solutions are offering a much richer set of mobile features, direct access in many cases to mobile provider networks. So if anything, I've seen more you can move a lot faster to support mobile as the mobile market quickly evolves when you're delivering from a cloud than if you're having to upgrade on-prem solutions and add on-prem components.
Tom, any comments?
Yeah, so it depends too if they're talking about a mobile employee or perhaps they were driving towards remote offices and that sort of thing, and both of them we see as being really good candidates for a cloud offering. Remote offices tend to be a good candidate where you've got multiple offices, smaller in nature, but you'd like them consolidated from a technology standpoint. Consolidating in the cloud makes a lot of sense. And Irwin mentioned the mobile employee, and I agree with his comments on that.
Great. And next question, please.
Next question, yes. So it says, I saw on one of the slides that AVST is currently the only voicemail solution that will integrate to Skype as an alternate voicemail storage. Did I read this correctly?
Yes. Yeah. So the de facto from Microsoft would be the Exchange Unified Messaging solution. So for those customers that cannot use Exchange UM, we talked about the reasons, retention policies, compliance, confidentiality, whatever. It tends to be a decision by the customer that they don't want to do that. AVST is the only provider that can provide voicemail functionality within Skype for Business.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Next question. So how do you provide compliant voice, do you provide compliant voice recording in either Skype for Business or Office 365 deployments?
Can you read that one more time?
Do you provide voice recording option with Skype for Business or Office?
Compliant voice recording option.
Thank you, Artie. We can take that one offline if we.
We do not provide that at this point, but I'm sure there are other people that do. It would be my answer, but I don't know.
Yeah, there are ecosystem partners that do call recording, meaning live call recording. You're recording a conversation between two or more people. There are partners within the Skype for Business ecosystem that do that. We do not.
Okay, another question. What have been the biggest considerations and impacts to going full PBX using Skype for Business?
Well, I can answer that from my perspective. We see really three things. Clearly, contact center is an area where customers need to make sure, and there's several, as we highlighted, several partners that are delivering contact center solutions. So that's one area. Some of the areas that we highlighted with our example, our case study, which is around specifically very big buckets, large mission-critical call processing environments, automated attendants. We see this quite common in very big enterprises, state and local governments, et cetera. Compliant messaging, so messaging that, for whatever reason, the customer, whether it's compliance or confidentiality, does not want to store voice messaging in email, and that's a showstopper, and until that's resolved, they can't move forward with the Skype for Business deployment. And then the other one that I would say is monitoring that I've seen, Tom, and I'm sure you would concur with this. There's we've seen customers where they start to do a Skype for Business pilot, and there are several very prominent monitoring tools now, Nectar being an example of that, where using that in conjunction with the Skype for Business pilot or upon the commencement of deployment will avoid a lot of issues around where in the network there are issues relative to the deployment. Tom, did you want to add anything on that?
No, those are certainly the top conversations that I'm involved with as well.
Irwin, did you have any comment on that?
I think the latter point that you said, monitoring and performance management, that's been the biggest issues that we've seen. Total cost of operations data that we published over the last couple of years has shown that Microsoft voice solutions tend to be roughly about 2 times more expensive to operate than comparative solutions from other vendors like Avaya, Cisco, ShoreTel. That number has continued to come down, though, over the last 3 years, and we'll be publishing some new data around that at Enterprise Connect.
Right. Okay, and how about one last question?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, let's see. Here's one regarding the case study. So you showcased the London case study with AVST. How much of a factor was mobility with that site?
It was a factor where they have a number of mobile employees, and it was important for them to be able to, especially in a mixed environment when they had both CS1000 and Skype for Business and mobile phones. It was important for them to have an application that controlled the call from end to end, such that if call comes into AVST, is answered, we try to connect on a specific device. If they don't answer on that, pull it back, try another device, rather than just transfer and release, and now it's out of the system, and the caller is going to get dumped into their mobile provider's voicemail or whatever. Something that would allow an application to control that call until it was successfully answered by the intended party was important to them, and we do that real well.
And that's very important in various use cases because of the criticality of the call, whether it's someone calling a mental health hotline or things like that, where getting the call completed is number one, has to be done. The other comment I would just make is that, and we see this a lot with customers, your workforce is different. Different elements of your workforce need different tools, and we're very big believers in you as a customer should be able to consume and demand from your vendors the ability to consume various elements of the stack a la carte for various elements of your workforce. And what we see customers doing is building, if you will, use cases for specific segments of their workforce. In the case of, I believe, this particular customer, Tom, there was a very specific use case for a certain segment of the workforce, as you said. So that's where mobility was the most critical element in that particular part of solving the solution. All right. Anything else, Ann?
Yeah, no, I'll just go ahead and wrap it up and let you know if you did ask a question that we did not get to, please be assured that we will follow up with you offline. We'll get your question to the most appropriate person to be able to respond back to you. And just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I hope you found the session and the information presented very valuable. And of course, would like to thank our presenters, Irwin, Tom, and Hardy, for this great information. And as I mentioned, we'll send you a link to the recording as well as the slides in a follow-up email. And that's pretty much it. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.